I'm really honored to have here on the panel, to my left, Julia Huang Xiangwang from the Ocean Affairs Council of Taiwan, and next to her, Anupa Ahi from TOMRA, and then Chloe Dubois from Ocean Legacy, all heavily engaged with plastics and reducing their use and their impact on the environment. Now, just a bit of background, which many of you will be familiar with. Every year, something like 400 million tons of plastic are produced, and that figure is forecast to rise by 70% by 2040, unless something is done. And that need to do something was what brought 170-odd countries to Busan in South Korea last December, and more than twice that number of other organizations to conclude a global plastics treaty, and everybody left empty-handed, which was a real pity. And the reasons for that are manifold, but certainly one group of highly ambitious countries, so-called, pulled away from another group that had low ambitions because they were major oil producers, Iran, Russia, and Saudi Arabia, of course, as well. So now the negotiations are meant to proceed with an agreement later in the year in, I think, August. But there are no intersessional meetings planned between now and then. So a big question is how a treaty is to be reached, if one is to be reached, what kind of a treaty that might be or should be, and what to do in the meantime. One thing I didn't mention about Busan, and at least a couple of you were there, maybe you all were, was that if the plastics lobby was a state, it would have been the biggest representation at Busan. So that's where a lot of the resistance is from. But there's two aspects to this, very broadly, and that is one, production, and the other is what to deal with plastic waste recycling. So we'll cover both of those issues, and I really would love to hear also what the priorities are of my fellow panelists. Perhaps to start with you, Anupa, may I just ask, given the absence of a treaty, what are the priorities, and how should one think about moving ahead in terms of dealing with plastics and trying to make effective change without some clear international binding treaty yet, both how to get towards a treaty, but what to do regardless?
So thanks. It's a very tricky question. First of all, I would like to say that I believe and I hope and I keep my fingers crossed that there will be a treaty. Although I feel like Busan all the lead up to Busan was almost like they were testing the waters, and the discussions really start now. There is already a lot of work that has been done by so-called progressive or ambitious countries, and there is a lot to learn from them. We have a lot of success stories of this problem having been recognized 20 to 30 years ago. Our company is 50 years old, and we started collection around that time, so this is a very old story, as the buzz and the noise has been created now. So I think we don't need to restart the journey that the European Union took, setting up rules around recycled content, collection targets, and also recycling definitions and standards. We can learn from them, and what we can do is show some leadership in applying those principles into our respective countries, regardless of what happens at the treaty. It might be a slow process, I'm afraid, but there is no reason why we should slow down with our own ambitions, because the problem is now.
Yes, and I guess that your point, the point that you make, is also underscored by the fact that, amongst those countries that want to see real change, they possess collectively a fair bit of economic clout, and presumably some clout in setting standards and the like. Is that right? In terms of what's allowable in their jurisdictions, Europe, I'm thinking of.
Yes. So there is the economic advantage, if that's what you're alluding to these countries. But there are countries with lower GDP and lower kind of income categories that have successfully actually benefited, also not just environmentally but financially, by putting in these systems. So I don't think that can be an excuse for not taking down or setting this intention and going down this path. I say this again. We apply the principles. We don't have to work with the same level of technology, although I'm representing a technology company here. It's an enabler, but you have to set the framework and the intention for it, and then it will lead to a fantastic outcomes, both in kind of macro socioeconomic space and also environmental. And we have fantastic examples of those.
Great. Well, perhaps we can talk about some of those examples later. Chloe, how to sort of maintain a sense of urgency then in the absence of a treaty, and what priorities should we have from your perspective?
Great question. Worldwide, plastic pollution affects every single sustainable goal through the United Nations. It touches every crisis that is currently happening on this planet, and the need for a treaty is immediate and it's urgent, and we need decisive action to happen now. So with the development of the treaty, there are points of contention where I don't see a clear path forward, and many of us don't, in terms of how some of these ambitious countries can work with the producers or the less ambitious countries in the time and the urgency that we need. So we can look, for capping production and looking at chemicals of concern, these larger, and human health. We look to these larger subjects to include them in the treaty, but as an annex or part of the treaty, so that it can allow us to develop a phased approach over a longer time frame, so that we have at least a starting place. And then we do have the topics involved in the treaty that we can continue to revisit. We can look to work with other pieces of legislation as well, such as the Basel Convention, that really looks at chemicals and toxins and that sort of thing. So we can pull in all these different policy pieces to lend and to develop the treaty as we go.
And just so that a layperson like me understands things around health, are you saying that, as very legitimately more is known about the health consequences for humans and for wildlife and for ecosystems of plastics, so the need to do something about that is made the greater, but the risk would be that if we now threw health as another factor into negotiations, that would risk stymieing things even further, but that health must be an issue that future negotiations and that future ambitions seek to target. Is that correct?
Human health is a critical topic of discussion, and it warrants the time to unpack the effects. And every day there's a new study coming out. We have very real world examples and evidence over the last 2 decades or more of real world health effects to human and animal populations. But we can't allow that to stop progress from occurring on the treaty. And because the issues surrounding health should have been introduced in INC 1, and they should have been part of the conversation right from the beginning, but they weren't, and it was added on later into subject matter and into later negotiations in the treaty. So what this has done is, brought forth an incredibly complex topic, contentious topic, and it's slowing down the progress of actually creating a treaty that we can then use as a baseline to move forward.
Got it. Julia, just to turn to Taiwan, there's a high public awareness about the harm that plastics causes, both certainly in the sea, and both plastics that come from the land, but also ghost nets, ghost fishing nets, and the like. And there's a movement amongst young Taiwanese drastically to reduce and to recycle plastics. The government itself is set on greatly improving the recycling rate of plastics. Very regrettably, despite all of this, you are not party to the global negotiations. So just give us a sense of the Taiwanese perspective and what your priorities are.
Okay, first, thank you for economists for inviting me here. It's my honors. And like you say that although we are not a member to United Nations, however, we strictly monitoring the process for the plastic treaties. And also, in recent, we also communicate with some other friend country, mentioned that the plastic is very complicated. So for some country, for some community, maybe not, they are ready. So my question is, are we ready or not? And for Taiwan, maybe we try to prepare ourselves, no matter it will come into force when. So maybe let me very quickly brief that. Maybe go back to 30 years, we are not so high awareness about marine plastic, marine debris. But our government should start the extended producer responsibility in maybe early 2000. So start to limit about the plastic bags of the recycle for the PET bottle. So until today, the PET recycle rate are 95% in Taiwan. And then maybe also around 2000s, our NGOs start to notice about the plastic issue. So there's ICC citizen science. But until 2010, there are some scientists in Taiwan conduct research about the marine debris. And almost recent 8 years, since 2018, our government finally noticed the situation very serious. So in the past years, we invest around 400 million US dollars for the marine debris issues.
Wow.
We conduct the scientific research, we recycle, and we have some public awareness. So now maybe there are more than 6,000 vessels, 5,000 divers are friends to us. They will help us to clean the marine debris. And also now around 60 companies, they try to develop the technology for circular economy. So I bring some of them, maybe there are some lovely material just for public awareness as well. So I think for our point of view, we try to get our people, our industry prepared. And when the plastic treaty adopted, we can follow that as soon as possible. And the experience are focused on Taiwan. And the recent years, we try to promote to international corporations. So now we are start a Indo-Pacific Marine Debris Cooperation Platform, try to communicate with neighbor country regarding the plastic, no matter scientific research, citizen science, or circular economy. We hope there could be a bigger network so we can more cooperate to resolve the question.
Thank you very much. Well, let's stick with recycling, if I may, for a moment, and just explore various facets of that. One is, there are successful countries, Taiwan, Japan, that recycle a high proportion of their plastics, or let's be honest, incinerate them, but nevertheless keep them out of the waste stream. But do successful countries need both to be prosperous and to have a kind of degree of social cohesion and consensus that allows for this system to work? That's one question. After all, when I was living here in Japan, we were on shifts to recycle the whole apartment block's garbage and to put them in the appropriate boxes. If you don't have that kind of system, it must be harder. Secondly, can that apply elsewhere as well, is really my question. You know, is that going to work in India and Indonesia? And secondly, circular economy, what's the catch? is it really possible to be circular? And even with high recycling, does that count as a circular economy? Clemmie, would you like to start with that?
Sure. I'll leave the systems approach.
Yes, we'd love your systems approach.
But I'll focus on, what's up with the circular economy. I think right now the circular economy is seen as this silver bullet that is in place that is going to solve all of our waste management issues. And that includes recycling and all of these tools that are necessary and part of a larger equation. But globally, we do not have the equation in place or the mechanisms that can support a prosperous market that the circular economy so desperately needs in order to succeed. And for a number of reasons, but a key highlight of that is because it is currently competing against huge subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. And nobody really likes to talk about that because it is a contentious topic. But I think at the end of last year, a study was released where it quantified close to 45 billion annually in global subsidies towards fossil fuel and the production of plastics. So really, we need global recycled content mandates, and we need leaders politically and industry leaders to be standing up, to be creating these markets that we need to then foster the circularity that we're all looking to create. And right now that's being challenged on a global level.
Very interesting. Anupa, would love your perspective on this, particularly from
I could give a 2-hour lecture on this. So I support everything that Chloe has pointed out, and you've packed many questions in that one question. You have talked about the social involvement and how important or fundamental it is to the kind of the change that drives a collection for recycling. And then you've talked about circularity or true recycling. So the first point is the social behaviors are largely cultural driven or basically law driven. So we've seen that when you put policy and frameworks and mandates in place, we observe behavior change over a period of time, and we have some excellent examples of that. I don't want to delve into it too much, but if there was no GST, how many people in the room would be willing to pay the GST? It is a tax, it's mandated, you all pay it, then you've stopped questioning it, and then it becomes a habit. And so it's not the perfect example, but really policies that are implemented can make behavior change. We also find that compliance is very hard when you talk about source separation, the example you were just giving. Even when you go to countries like Germany and you open the various bins, you will find a lot of mixed material into different bins. And so the compliance is very hard, and technology has since then moved forward to actually simplify this. And you literally could collect dry and wet and process all dry and separate it into really good quality raw material back again. Those systems exist. The question is that everyone thinks of them as very costly and very technology heavy. In some cases they are, in other cases they are kind of hybrid ways of setting those up, and the economic equation can be created by tools like EPR. EPR is not a science. You will have to define an EPR to suit a country, the vision, and so on and so forth. And it's a process in its own right. When it comes to recycling systems, we often hear recycling is a farce, recycling, we cannot recycle our way out of it, but we need to define what recycling is. There are materials that should be kept in circulation, and recycled content and things like that are good drivers to drive that and create the demand and market for it. The others, if you are downcycling them, then it has to be thought carefully, where does the second life end, and so on and so forth. So that life cycle assessment is needed, but there are some excellent examples of successful circular systems and the economy that they generate. So the circular economy is possible. Currently, if you take examples of plastic bottles, drinking bottles, of all the millions of bottles that are put out every minute, only 2% only 2% are actually going in a closed loop. Everything else is being downcycled. So we're losing millions of bottles into nature every minute, actually. So the systems exist. You just have to apply them through policy and framework.
And single-use plastics, is that primarily a legislative challenge? What plans does Taiwan have there on single-use plastics?
Yeah, like I mentioned, we have different measures for different products. So since year 2002, we limit on the plastic bags, and then micro beads are also limited in 2018. And recently, we banned or limited the use of plastic straws, and also for the hotel, also limit the use for single-use those materials. So I think it's step by step, and during each step, we need to take time and effort to educate the public. Why should we do that? So at that time, the power of non-governmental organization and the social media will be very important. As a matter of fact, in 2018, we have a marine debris governance plan set a goal to limit those single-use plastics by 2030s, and we are still working on that. And back to the circular economy, just a case share that we also have a company. They cooperate with the Palais for the Ocean to collect PET bottle from some island countries. And in the beginning, because the technology is not mature, so maybe there's a coverage rate is quite low. Because island countries, they transport the very bad quality PET bottle to Taiwan. So that's also carbon emissions. But after a training and some local infrastructures, now the recycling rate are higher and higher. So I want to say that 100% recycle might be difficult, but we can try to using the capacity building and the technology and the training to increase the rate. I think that's our purpose. And also, in conjunction to the carbon emission issue, that's another motivation for our industry try to involve. Otherwise, many companies complain it's cost and not benefit.
Yeah. Many of you will have seen the video from California's Attorney General yesterday describing how the state of California is going to go after Exxon, not because of its plastics production, but because the state claims of the wool being pulled over the eyes of consumers about recycling. But let's now just go to the production end, because that appears to be, one of the most intractable aspects of this. A powerful lobby, as I say, backed by oil and gas producing states, for all of whom producing plastics is seen as the right thing to do. And we have, of course, seen with the Trump administration, even though he came to power promoting free choice, he's mandated the use of private straws in federal offices. So how to deal with this powerful lobby, whose production, after all, is the reason why there's an attempt to achieve a plastics global treaty in the first place?
Is that for me?
Would you like to?
Sure. Yeah. It is a massive challenge, I would say honestly, to be able to look at the production of plastic and the growth trajectory that is being anticipated for these types of materials. Currently, there's not enough infrastructure on this planet to manage the materials we currently produce and use, let alone the growth. And I think this really comes down to we need our political leaders. We need strong leadership, strong national leadership in countries to be setting policies in place to mitigate and to curb this production. And I know this is contentious in terms of framing this in the Global Plastics Treaty, but we cannot produce infinite amounts of plastic, and we need to be strategic where we use these materials. We need to redesign our systems, the products we use, so that they are circular and that we use these materials intelligently. And this is going to be one of, I think, the greatest challenges of our time, is this transition. You know, plastics feed the triple planetary crisis, and we don't have any time to wait right now. And so trying to find this middle ground between producers and ambitious states is a very much needed conversation, but it is also, in its own right, very challenging.
Yeah, yeah. Would you like to add anything to that, Anupa? Would you?
Maybe I can add just one comment here. Yesterday at the panel discussion, we talked about, oh sorry, it was today, so I'm just losing track of time. Mr. Bagay at the panel discussion said that we could learn a lot from Montreal Protocol, where enough time was spent in assessment of what is essential versus what is not essential. And even if you have 170 countries up against 3 big countries, you can bring change in the 170 countries. Please trust me that it will bring a wave of change elsewhere in the world. Let's address the countries that are willing to do, and let's not worry about the ones who are not willing to do. I think the change can be brought through policy, but through very wise assessment, the strategic assessment that you are referring to, because that will allow for that middle ground. What is absolutely necessary versus what is absolutely not necessary, and somewhere in between to address the convenience part of life.
Well, that's a very powerful message, not to let the best stymie the possible. We've got about 7 minutes, and we'd all love to hear from the floor. So yeah, questions, please. And my colleagues have microphones that they can pass around. This is a subject I'm sure a lot of you feel very dearly about.
There's a question in the back there.
Where is that?
There.
Ah, thank you. Yes, if you could bring the microphone down here, thanks. And who else afterwards? We have time for 3 or 4 questions. Please be thinking about it. If you could just give your name and affiliation as well, that would be great.
Hello, now it's on. Hi, I'm Malte. I'm in the toy industry. I'm there for sustainability. Thank you so much for your expertise on this. My question is actually away from plastic. So we all talk about how bad plastic is, the pollution, the treaty, and all of that. But what kind of alternatives do you guys see in plastic, and how can we promote them at an affordable price point?
Great question.
I mean, I can try to answer. I mean, we work with a lot of companies that try to bring new products and new design elements for circularity. And last few days, and Chloe, you've been with me in some of those sessions, we've seen a lot of alternate materials being discussed. But there was also a great suggestion about really addressing kind of the education or academia side of chemical engineering per se, to develop material that are basically degradable in sun, soil, and water. So what is happening with plastic right now is it's not degradable in water because of some additional chemicals. So there could be a solution within chemical industry itself to resolve that. So the problem with all other material streams, and we hear about these biomaterial that is a replacement of single-use takeaway containers, for example. The trouble with those materials is they are adding to your landfillable waste. They're not going anywhere for a few months or a few years even, unless they are also collected separately. Even to compost those materials, there's a process. They will not sit there and just compost by themselves, at least most of them. So we have to be very careful when we talk about alternate materials, because ultimately everything still boils down to collection mechanisms. Please be careful about that. Hence why all these new material streams that are being innovated are still not scalable. It's very important to understand that. So innovation is happening, and companies like us are always constantly supporting that, and there's a lot of academia interest and scientists working towards this, but nothing scalable enough to really truly replace some of the critical uses of plastic. We're not quite there yet.
Thank you.
And if I can add on to that, there are, I think we need to look at the system itself. We should not be replacing single use with single use. We need to redefine consumption, I think, and the exploitation of resources that we're currently extracting. And to your point of what you were just saying, oftentimes these biodegradable materials, unfortunately at this point, because they do require infrastructure for management, they end up as a contamination right now in the overall supply chain. Even though there's so much potential in them and by using them. We can also look to different systems like refill systems and the products that we do make out of plastic ensure that they follow the principles of circularity. Exactly. So looking at mono materials, simple design, getting rid of lamination. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit that we can start to focus on while we shift our economy into reusables and alternatives that need the financing right now to scale. So it's you know, and it's interesting because there's so many pieces in the equation and the puzzle, and they all need to be working together in order to have something successful in the end.
And that's the job of government and business and consumer representatives to work together? Is that the...
Everyone at the table, including oil and gas. Yeah. I mean, everybody needs to be involved in this conversation.
Thank you. We've time for one last question, the gentleman here. Could you put your hand up so that my colleagues can see you? Great.
This is self-serving a little bit. I'm James from Ocean Legacy. I just want everyone in the room to wish Chloe a happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Chloe!
Happy birthday, Chloe.
And I want to thank The Economist. I want to thank The Economist for inviting you all here from all over the world to be present for her birthday. It's,
oh my gosh.
It's really wonderful. But thank you.
You should prepare cake.
Thanks, James.
Very good. Well, thank you very much.
We're missing the cake.
Well, you've brilliantly helped conclude the session. So I will hope that could I just ask you all to join me in a big round of applause for the birthday girl, Chloe, for Anupa, and for Julia. And thank you all very much.